The animals are much more content with mere existence than we are. The plants are wholly so, and man is so according to how dull and intensive he is. The animal's life consequently contains less suffering but also less pleasure than the human's. The direct reason being that on the one hand it is free from care and anxiety and the torments that attend them, but on the other is without hope, and therefore has no share in that anticipation of a happy future which, together with enchanting products of the imagination which accompany it, is the source of most of our greatest joys and pleasures. The animal lacks both anxiety and hope because its consciousness is restricted to what is clearly evident and thus to the present moment. The animal is the present incarnate. But precisely because this is so, it appears in one respect to be truly sagacious compared with us, namely in its peaceful, untroubled enjoyment of the present. Its obvious composure often puts to shame our own frequently restless and discontented condition. If the above discussion has demonstrated that the reason man's life is more full of suffering than the animal's is his greater capacity for knowledge, we can now trace this back to a more general law and thus attain to a much more comprehensive view. Knowledge is in itself always painless. Pain affects only the will and consists in an obstruction, impediment, or frustration of it. Nonetheless, this frustration of the will, if it is to be felt as pain, must be accompanied by knowledge. That is why even physical pain is conditioned by the nerves and their connection with the brain, so that an injury to a limb is not felt if the nerves leading from the limb to the brain are severed or the brain itself is devitalized by chloroform. That spiritual pain is conditional upon knowledge goes without saying, and it is easy to see that it will increase with the degree of knowledge. We can thus express the whole relationship figuratively by saying that the will is the string, its frustration or impediment the vibration of the string, knowledge the sounding board, and pain the sound. Now, this means that not only inorganic matter, but the plant too is incapable of feeling pain. However, many frustration its will may undergo. On the other hand, every animal suffers pain, because knowledge, however imperfect, is the true characteristic of animality. At each higher stage of animal life there is a correspondence increase in pain. In the lowest animals it is extremely slight, but even in the highest it nowhere approaches the pain which man is capable of feeling, since even the highest animals lack thought and concepts. And it is right that this capacity for pain should reach its zenith only where, by virtue of the existence of reason, there also exists the possibility of denial of the will, for otherwise it would be nothing but aimless cruelty. In our early youth we sit before the life that lies ahead of us like children sitting before the curtain in a theater, in happy and tense anticipation of whatever is going to appear. Luckily, we do not know what really will appear, for to him who does know, children can sometimes seem like innocent delinquents, sentenced not to death, but to life, who have not yet discovered what their punishment will consist of. Nonetheless, everyone desires to achieve old age, that is to say, a condition in which one can say, "Today it is bad, and day by day it will get worse, until at last the worst of all arrives." If you imagine, in so far as it is approximately possible, the sum total of distress, pain and suffering of every kind which the sun shines upon in its course, You will have to admit it would have been much better if the sun had been able to call up the phenomenon of life as little on the earth as on the moon, and if, here as there, the surface were still in a crystalline condition. You can also look upon our life as an episode and profitably disturbing the blessed calm of nothingness. In any case, even he who has found life tolerably bearable will, the longer he lives, feels the more clearly that on the whole it is a disappointment, nay, a cheat. If two men who were friends in youth meet in old age after the lapse of an entire generation, the principal feeling the sight of one another, linked as it is with recollection of earlier years, will arouse in both will be one of total disappointment with the whole of life, which once lay so fair before them in the rosy dawn of youth, promised so much and performed so little. This feeling will dominate so decidedly over every other that they will not even think it necessary to speak of it, but will silently assume it as the basis of their conversation. If the act of procreation were neither the outcome of a desire nor accompanied by feelings of pleasure, but a matter to be decided on the basis of purely rational considerations, is it likely the human race would still exist? Would each of us not rather have felt so much pity for the coming generation as to prefer to spare it the burden of existence, or at least not wish to take it upon himself to impose that burden upon it in cold blood? As a reliable compass for orienting yourself in life, nothing is more useful than to accustom yourself to regarding this world as a place of atonement, a sort of penal colony. When you have done this, you will order your expectations of life according to the nature of things and no longer regard the calamities, sufferings, torments and miseries of life as something irregular and not to be expected, but will find them entirely in order, well knowing that each of us is here being punished for his existence, and each in his own particular way. This outlook will enable us to view the so-called imperfections of the majority of men, that is, their moral and intellectual shortcomings and the facial appearance resulting therefrom, without surprise and certainly without indignation, for we shall always bear in mind where we are and consequently regard every man first and foremost as a being who exists only as a consequence of his capability and whose life is an expiation of the crime of being born. The conviction that the world, and therefore man too, is something which really ought not to exist is in fact calculated to instill in us indulgence towards one another. For what can be expected of beings placed in such a situation as we are? From this point of view, one might indeed consider that the appropriate form of address between man and man ought to be not "Sir," but "Fellow sufferer." However strange this may sound, it corresponds to the nature of the case, makes us see other men in a true light, and reminds us of what are the most necessary of all things: tolerance, patience, forbearance, and charity, which each of us needs and which each of us therefore owes.